The year is 1789, and France is a stinky, bankrupt mess ruled by this guy, King Louis XVI. He's known for being very shy and socially awkward, but overall, he's a pretty nice guy. And he rules the kingdom along with his wife, Queen Marie-Antoinette, a professional party animal and socialite who's also crazy about fashion. Here she is, wearing a very trendy ship on her head. They both live in the huge palace of Versailles, not far from Paris. As for the rest of the people in France, they are divided into 3 different groups: clergy, nobility, and commoners. Clergy are people who work for the church, like priests, nuns, and bishops. Nobility are like the rich, cool kids with posh names like the Duke of Baguette. And commoners are just regular, everyday people like you and me. Now imagine for a second you had to join one of the groups. Which one would you pick? Keep in mind that if you join clergy or nobility, you're probably going to be rich, live in a cool castle, and have lots of fun hanging out and partying with your friends like there's no tomorrow. If you choose to be a commoner, though, you're going to be poor and have a horrible job which will pay very little money, most of which you'll have to spend almost immediately paying huge taxes. Because guess what? Clergy and nobility somehow need to pay for all their partying, right? And because they're in charge, they decided that, well, they're a lot more comfortable if you're the one paying. So the more they party, the more taxes you have to pay. The truth is that being a commoner just plain sucks. But commoners have finally had enough of being bullied and pushed around, and they've started rioting. They're fed up, hungry, and they just want to be treated fairly. And that right there is the beginning of the French Revolution. King Louis heard about the riots, though, and he decided that to calm commoners down, he would have a meeting with them, along with clergy and nobility, so they could sit down and have a chat, hopefully reaching some kind of peace agreement that would make everyone happy, which sounds pretty good, right? Well, it wasn't. Commoners quickly figured out that the whole thing was fake and nobody really cared for what they had to say, so they stormed out of the meeting and decided that it was time for them to play rough and force clergy and nobility to give them the respect they deserved. So first, they created a thing called the National Assembly, a kind of parliament that would represent them. But more importantly, they promised to create a constitution, which is pretty much short for, "Hey, King Louis, from now on, we make the rules." King Louis found the whole situation terrifying, so in a bit of a panic, he called up his troops, both into Paris and Versailles, just to make sure he was safe. But the guys at the National Assembly saw the king's troops coming and said, "Hey, wait a minute. Are we sure King Louis isn't just going to try to kick our butts? We might need protection. In fact, we should have our own army. But you know what? First, we're going to need to get ourselves some guns." Which brings us to the 14th of July, 1789, the superstar date of the whole revolution. Commoners decided to get their guns by stealing them out of this big military building in Paris. But of course, stealing from the army is pretty risky business, so they decided not to go at it alone. And everyone invited their friends, who brought their cousins, who invited the neighbors, who then brought along their uncles, and they managed to put together a huge mob of at least 50,000 people that just charged right into the building, and they got themselves more guns than you can shake a stick at. But they were very disappointed when they found no ammunition or gunpowder in there. But then someone said, "Hey, I heard they have a bunch of ammo and gunpowder sitting in Bastille prison. We should go get it." And off they went to Bastille prison, an old fortress down the road from there. And long story short, they charged into the building, found their loot, grabbed the prison's chief, and then chopped his head off with a knife, stuck it on top of a pole, and then marched away, lifting it up into the air like some kind of creepy trophy. And things were just getting started. A few weeks later, the National Assembly published a thing called the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, which pretty much said, listen, all men are created free and equal, which was a pretty scary idea for the guys in power. And then on top of that, angry women workers from Paris markets, fed up of bread getting more and more expensive and them going hungry, decided that they were going to have a little chat with King Louis, whether he wanted to or not. And on their way to Versailles, they gathered another huge angry mob that ended up charging right into the palace, chopped a few of the guards' heads off, and then demanded that Louis and Marie-Antoinette leave Versailles and return to Paris with them. And Louis, not wanting to have his own head stuck on top of a pole, said, Sure, we'd love to do just that. And they moved into the Tuileries Palace in central Paris, where they quickly noticed that things were just nowhere near as fun as they used to be. The revolution had taken away a lot of their power, and things were only getting worse. But secretly, Marie-Antoinette and her friends put together a crazy plan that would see the royal family escape the Tuileries Palace and then join some of their supporters in northeastern France to then hopefully launch a counterattack against the revolution. And then one night, after months of intense planning, Louis, Marie, and their kids finally made a break for it, and disguised as servants, they snuck their way to their getaway vehicle and then slipped out of Paris undetected under the cover of night. But a few hours later, they were caught and dragged right back to town. Now let me ask you a question. Have you ever had a really, really bad neighbor? The kind who keeps you up at night with sounds like he's bowling in his kitchen, blasting heavy metal, building a treehouse, and practicing his tap dance routine while trying to bounce billiard balls? If the answer is yes, then you'll know exactly how France's neighboring countries felt like. They didn't like the whole revolutionary chaos right next door, so they complained. Austria was particularly snarky, and then a few words were said, push came to shove, and before you knew it, Austria and France went to war. And things didn't quite end there, because then Prussia said, "You know what? I agree with you, Austria. France, you really need to calm things down." And they also declared war on France. And then together, they sent France a letter saying, "Dear France, we hope you're doing well. We just wanted to let you know that if you hurt King Louis or his family, we will kick your revolutionary butts and burn Paris to the ground." Well, the letter really annoyed most revolutionaries. In fact, many of them thought that King Louis was the mastermind behind the whole thing. And they found that idea so infuriating that they attacked the Tuileries Palace hunting for Louis. But he managed to sneak out of the back door and hide in the assembly, where, as you probably remember, they're not exactly Louis fans either. So they welcomed him in with a friendly, "Hey Louis, nice of you to drop by. Great timing. So listen, there's a few things we need to go over with you. You know that whole cool, I am King Louis XVI of France thing you had going on? Well, it's over. We decided that France is now a republic. We don't have a king anymore. So you're just plain Louis from now on. Oh, and by the way, plain Louis, you and your family are all under arrest." After the arrest, Louis was put on trial for treason against his own country. He was of course quickly found guilty and sentenced to death by guillotine. The following morning, he was beheaded in central Paris at Revolution Square. A few months later, Marie-Antoinette will suffer the exact same fate. Now, remember the angry neighbors? Well, they didn't take news of the executions too well. And more countries declared war on France, which meant France now needed a ton of new soldiers to fight all of these new enemies. So then the revolutionary government said, "Hey people of France, guess what? You're now all soldiers and you're going to war." But people in many areas of France said, no we're not. No. But the government insisted, which led many people to say, "Okay then, we'll fight. But we'll fight against the revolution." So now, faced with angry neighbors and angry locals ganging up against them, the revolution decided to create a thing called the Committee for Public Safety. It ended up being led by this very stylish guy, Maximilien Robespierre, who will almost single-handedly lead France into what will be known as the Reign of Terror. Where the whole point of it is, well, terror. They will terrify any enemy of the revolution into submission. But how exactly do you terrorize people into submission? Well, Max Robespierre is right there, so we might as well ask him. Hi, Max. So what's the plan? The plan is terror. Yeah, I know, but scaring everyone is, well, hard. How are you going to do that?
Do you see that man over there?
Yeah?
Do you see anything special about him?
No, not really.
Well, I think he looks suspicious.
I don't think he does. You just chopped his head off.
Oui, no more suspicious. See that woman over there?
Yeah?
Suspicious.
But Max, I don't think she was. Hey, what did he do?
Suspicious.
Max, I think you might be getting...
Suspicious.
Can we slow down for a second? I think you
I
should...
think you are starting to look suspicious.
No, you're right, Max. This is absolutely terrifying. You're killing it. So, thanks for the chat, but we really need to get going now.
Suspicious.
So Max started chopping everyone's head off, and nobody was safe. Even members of government were scared he'd chop their heads off. Some of them tried approaching him, trying to reason and get him to calm down a bit. And they found him to be a surprisingly good listener. But once he was done listening...
Suspicious.
So in the end, they had to arrest him, and believe it or not, they sentenced him to death by guillotine, of course. Robespierre's death made him just one of the 17,000 people sentenced to death during the Reign of Terror, which is only a portion of the at least 40,000 people who died, most of them without a trial. And although the Reign of Terror had come to an end, and things in France chilled out a bit, wars raged on, people were still hungry, the government was still terrible, and the future looked pretty bleak. Little did anyone know, though, that out on their battlefields there was a young soldier quickly making a name for himself and rising up the ranks. He will soon topple the government, end the revolution, and single-handedly lead France to the height of its power. His name is Napoleon. But that's a story for another time. Thanks for watching.
I think you should like the video and subscribe to the channel. Do it now! And then visit our website at thisisnotalecture.com, or else you will be considered suspicious.